She knocked on my door in the middle of the night, her voice soft but steady as she said, "I heard you crying last night." I didn't know it then, but that single sentence would change the way I looked at her, and myself. It was close to midnight when I heard the knock. Not the sharp, impatient kind that rattles the frame, but a hesitant tap, followed by silence. I almost ignored it, assuming maybe it was someone at the wrong door, but then came a second knock, soft, deliberate. Something about it made me put down my phone and get up. When I opened the door, she was standing there. My neighbor. Early 30s, maybe, though she carried herself with a kind of quiet poise that made her seem older in spirit. She looked nothing like the polished, put-together version I'd seen in passing at the mailbox or walking her dog. Her hair was pulled back loosely, strands falling free around her face. No makeup, just the natural lines of someone who had lived a little, smiled a little, maybe hurt a little. Her hand rested against the doorframe as if she was bracing herself. Her eyes, calm but searching, met mine. Then she spoke, in a voice that was barely above a whisper. "I heard you crying last night." For a second, I couldn't breathe. Heat rushed to my face, and I felt every ounce of shame crawl up my spine. I wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, to pretend she must have been mistaken. But her expression wasn't mocking or invasive, it was gentle, almost protective. Sorry, I muttered, though I didn't even know what I was apologizing for. Crying. Being overheard. Being weak. "You don't have to be sorry," she said quickly, shaking her head. The motion was small, but there was a firmness in it. "I just wanted you to know. I heard. And I understand." The hallway was dim, the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. I became conscious of the way she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, the way her thumb rubbed against the wood of the doorframe. She wasn't just here to make a polite comment, she was reaching out, though I couldn't quite grasp why. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "You really didn't have to," I started, but the words trailed off. Her eyes softened then, the corners crinkling just slightly. Sometimes it's harder to stay quiet than it is to knock. Something in me cracked at that, not enough to spill open, but enough to let her words sink in. I nodded, stepping back a little, not quite ready to invite her in but unwilling to close the door. In that fragile space between us, the thin slice of hallway air carrying her warmth into my apartment, I felt seen. And maybe, for the first time in a long while, I didn't mind being seen. For a long moment, I just stood there, gripping the edge of the door like it might anchor me. Her words were still echoing in my head. I'd cried before, sure, but never with the thought that someone else might hear it, much less mention it. I took a breath. "Do you want to come in?" The words slipped out before I could second-guess them. Her lips pressed together like she was considering, then she nodded softly. "If you don't mind." I stepped aside, letting her in. The sound of her slippers against my floor was strangely loud in the quiet apartment. She glanced around, not in the judging way some people do, but more as if she wanted to understand the space I lived in. "I can make some tea," I offered, heading to the kitchen. I was grateful for something to do with my hands. She followed, standing just inside the doorway, her presence filling the small room. "Tea sounds nice." The kettle hissed as I set it on the stove. The silence between us wasn't sharp, it was thick, almost weighty. I could feel her eyes on me, not prying, but steady, patient. When the tea was ready, I slid a mug across the table. She wrapped her hands around it instantly, as though soaking in its warmth. Her shoulders, which had been slightly tense, seemed to loosen just a fraction. For a while, we didn't say much. The steam rose between us, curling into the air like something fragile. My nerves buzzed at the thought that she'd heard me cry, that she knew something about me I'd kept hidden. But instead of shame, there was something gentler pressing against my chest, relief, maybe, that someone had noticed at all. "You know," she said finally, her voice quiet but sure, "I've had nights like that too. Where the silence feels heavier than the walls around me. I looked up at her, surprised by the honesty. She wasn't trying to console me with empty words. She was offering a piece of herself, carefully, like it mattered who received it. I nodded slowly. Yeah. Sometimes it just gets too much. Her eyes held mine then, soft but unflinching. It wasn't pity I saw there, it was recognition. And that, somehow, felt more intimate than any touch. The sound of her fingertips tapping lightly against the porcelain filled the small pauses in our conversation, grounding us both. In that quiet kitchen, with nothing but 2 mugs of tea and the hum of the kettle cooling on the stove, I felt the first thread of connection pull taut between us, thin, delicate, but undeniably there. The tea between us had cooled, but neither of us seemed in a rush to leave the table. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable anymore, it was more like a space we were both afraid to disturb, a thin glass surface that might shatter if handled too roughly. She leaned forward slightly, her elbows resting on the table, her fingers still curled around the mug as though it could anchor her. "You don't have to tell me why," she said gently, "but sometimes saying it out loud makes it a little lighter to carry." Her words lingered in the air, and I realized she wasn't just being polite. She wanted me to trust her. That thought alone was both terrifying and oddly comforting. I exhaled slowly, the kind of breath you don't even realize you've been holding. It's just, everything, I guess. Pressure. Expectations. I feel like I'm supposed to have things figured out by now, but I don't. And it's like I'm running just to stay in place. My voice cracked a little at the end, and I hated how raw it sounded. But when I dared to look at her, her expression hadn't changed. No judgment. No awkwardness. Just listening. "I get that," she said softly. "More than you know." There were nights when I sat in my own kitchen, staring at the walls, wishing someone would just knock on my door. The admission caught me off guard. She was always so composed, so graceful in the way she carried herself. I hadn't expected cracks in her armor. Yet here she was, showing them to me. "I don't really talk about this stuff," I murmured. "Neither do I," she replied with a faint, almost self-conscious smile. "That's why it feels strange, but also a little easier, right now." Her words wrapped around me like a soft blanket. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was carrying everything alone. My eyes dropped to the table, and in that silence, I felt the lightest touch, her fingertips brushing against my wrist. Just a small gesture, fleeting but deliberate. My skin burned where she touched me, but not in a way that made me pull back. It was such a simple thing, that quiet reminder that someone was sitting here with me, but it shifted something inside. The loneliness that had weighed on me the night before didn't feel quite so unbearable now. For the first time, I wondered if maybe she needed this as much as I did. The silence stretched, but not the kind that begged to be filled. It was more like we were circling something unspoken, both aware of it, neither ready to step across the line. She leaned back slightly, her fingers finally letting go of the mug. The soft clink of ceramic against wood felt louder than it should. Her eyes studied me in a way that made my pulse skip, thoughtful, searching, like she was trying to place me somewhere I didn't quite fit. "You know," she began, her tone lighter than before, though I could hear the careful edge beneath it, "I'm probably supposed to be the wise neighbor here. The older one. The one who says something comforting and sends you off with a pat on the back." Her smile flickered, self-deprecating, but it didn't hide the truth tucked inside her words. She was drawing a line, age, experience, the invisible space society says should keep us apart. I should have let it pass. I should have laughed it off, changed the subject. But instead, I found myself shaking my head, my voice low, steady. "That's not how I see you." Her eyes widened just slightly, enough for me to notice. "Oh." I swallowed, my chest tightening as I tried to find the right words. "You don't feel older. Not to me. You feel," I hesitated, searching for something truer than just admiration. "You feel alive." Strong. Like you've been through things and come out still, shining somehow. Her breath caught, the smallest sound, but in the quiet of the kitchen it felt like a bell ringing. She looked away for a moment, as though my words had landed closer than she wanted to admit. "That's kind of you," she said at last, though her voice was softer now, her guard slipping. I noticed then the faintest trace of lines at the corner of her eyes, not flaws, but evidence of laughter, of nights she hadn't slept, of a life actually lived. I found myself memorizing them, not because they aged her, but because they made her real. She drew her hand back slowly, almost reluctantly, from where it had brushed against mine earlier. The absence of her touch felt sharper than I expected. The air thickened between us, filled with the unspoken. She was older. I was younger. The world might see it as a boundary. But in that moment, with her sitting across from me, her eyes steady but uncertain, all I could think was how much I wanted to close that space. And I wasn't sure if she wanted to stop me. We drifted from the kitchen into the living room, as if the weight of what we'd said, and what we hadn't, needed a softer place to settle. I flicked on the lamp beside the couch, the warm light spilling across the room in gentle amber tones. It painted her face differently than the harsher overhead light had, softening her expression, making her look less guarded and more human. She lowered herself onto the couch first, tucking one leg beneath her, her posture relaxed but her eyes still carrying that sharp, watchful edge. I hesitated before sitting beside her, not too close, not too far. Still, the space between us felt charged, as though even the air carried some invisible thread tying us together. "You keep it simple in here," she remarked, glancing around at the modest furnishings. Her tone wasn't judgmental, if anything, it felt curious, maybe even approving. "I guess I've never been good at decorating my life," I admitted with a half-smile. Her eyes flicked back to me then, warm, almost amused, and something unspoken passed in that glance. Not pity, not distance, just recognition. We talked in fragments, about nothing and everything. Her favorite books, the music I listened to when I couldn't sleep, how she sometimes stayed up just to watch the city lights fade into dawn. The words weren't important, not really. What mattered was the way she leaned a little closer with each exchange, the way our voices grew softer, as though this conversation wasn't meant for anyone else in the world. At some point, our knees brushed, barely. I froze, waiting for her to pull back, to shift away. She didn't. If anything, she leaned just slightly toward me, enough that the touch lingered, unspoken but undeniable. The faint scent of her perfume drifted toward me, something subtle, floral, with a warmth beneath it that reminded me of early summer nights. I noticed the way a strand of her hair slipped forward, catching the light, and I had to stop myself from reaching to tuck it behind her ear. She caught me watching and quickly looked away, a faint flush rising to her cheeks. But she didn't move. Neither of us did. The distance between us was still there, yes, but it no longer felt insurmountable. It felt like a bridge, delicate, fragile, waiting for someone to take the first step across. And I realized, with a quiet certainty that surprised me, that I wanted it to be me. The room had grown quieter, though nothing had really changed. The lamp still glowed softly in the corner, the night hummed faintly beyond the windows, but between us, something had shifted. The air felt heavier, like it was carrying every word we hadn't said. She leaned back against the couch cushion, her body angled slightly toward me, her arm resting casually along the top of the sofa. Casual, but not careless. I could feel the weight of her presence, even without her touching me. My own hand twitched against my leg, wanting to reach for hers but afraid of what it might mean if I did. Her eyes flickered toward me and then away again, her lashes lowering like she was hiding something she didn't want me to see. But her closeness betrayed her. If she truly wanted distance, she could have shifted away long ago. I swallowed, my voice low. I don't usually let anyone see me like this. Her lips curved faintly, not quite a smile, more like an understanding. Neither do I. The words were simple, but they sank deep. For a moment, I wasn't just the younger neighbor and she wasn't just the woman across the hall. We were two people caught in the same fragile space of wanting and not knowing. I turned slightly toward her, my hand lifting, hesitating in the air between us. Every part of me screamed to close the distance, to feel her skin against mine. But I stopped, hovering, the weight of choice pressing down. Would it be too much? Would it push her away? She seemed to notice. Her gaze dipped to my hand, then returned to my face, her expression unreadable but not cold. Then, without speaking, she shifted closer, her shoulder brushing mine, just barely, but enough to undo me. Sometimes, she murmured, so soft I almost missed it, it's enough just knowing someone is here. Her head tilted lightly against my shoulder, her hair brushing against my arm. The warmth of her temple pressed through the thin fabric of my shirt, and my breath caught at the contact. I didn't move. I didn't dare. My chest tightened, a strange mixture of comfort and longing twisting together. The steady rhythm of her breathing beside me was grounding, and yet it lit something inside I couldn't name. I lowered my hand slowly until it rested against the cushion near hers. Close, not touching. But the distance had never felt smaller. Time seemed to stretch as she rested against my shoulder. The world outside faded, the city, the hum of traffic, even the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. All I was aware of was the warmth of her beside me, the steady rhythm of her breath, the way her presence softened the sharp edges of my loneliness. I didn't know how long we stayed like that. Minutes, maybe longer. It didn't matter. For once, silence wasn't something to fight against, it was something to share. Eventually, she shifted, her head lifting gently from my shoulder. I felt the absence instantly, like a cool draft where warmth had been. She looked at me, her eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. For a moment, I thought she might say something, but instead she simply drew in a quiet breath and stood. The spell wasn't broken, if anything, it deepened. I rose too, almost without thinking, following her to the door. Each step felt reluctant, like my body knew what my mind hadn't admitted yet, I didn't want her to leave. At the doorway, she turned to face me. Her hand lingered on the doorknob, but she didn't twist it open right away. Instead, she looked at me the way people do when they want to remember your face exactly as it is in that moment. "Thank you," she said softly. Just 2 words, but they carried weight. Gratitude, yes, but also acknowledgement, like I had given her something she didn't know she needed. Before I could answer, she reached out. Her hand rested against my chest, light but steady, her palm pressing just enough for her to feel the beat of my heart beneath. The touch was brief, but in it was everything we hadn't said aloud, the vulnerability, the hesitations, the connection neither of us expected to find tonight. Instinctively, I placed my hand over hers, holding it there for a beat longer. Our eyes locked, and for the first time, there was no need to hide what lingered between us. She didn't promise to come back. I didn't ask her to. But as she finally pulled her hand away and slipped out into the hallway, I knew. This wasn't the end. The quiet of the apartment didn't feel so crushing anymore. It felt different, as though her presence still lingered in the air, woven into the walls. I leaned against the door after closing it, her touch still warm against my chest, and for the first time in a long time, I believed that maybe the silence could hold something good. Something beginning.